Diamante. Yan na.
Yun, thank you.
Diamante. 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 Sorry, I have to go. Thank you.
Good luck, Alex. Laban.
And why are the people who cover tennis for a living the ones who look the most shaken by it? Why does the tournament's 17th seed, a player with a losing record against both of her possible second-round opponents, have fans camping outside a practice court before she's hit a single ball? And why does one of the most respected voices in the sport keep bringing up her name like she's watching something she can't fully explain yet? Something strange is unfolding in Mason, Ohio. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why it doesn't add up on paper and exactly why that's the whole point. Picture the Lindner Family Tennis Center on a morning that should be quiet. Cincinnati, in tennis terms, is the calm before the storm, the last major stop before New York. Players come here to sharpen their games in relative peace before the chaos of the US Open swallows them whole. The draws are deep, the courts are fast, and the atmosphere is usually professional and controlled. Except this year, there is no peace. There are lines forming before the gates even open. There are people pressed against the fencing around the practice courts, phones raised, waiting for a glimpse of a woman who hasn't even started her tournament yet. Practice sessions that would normally draw a handful of coaches and a few curious locals are suddenly surrounded. The energy feels borrowed from a much larger stage, and here's where it stops making sense. The story everyone assumes explains this doesn't hold up. Because normally, when a WTA event lights up like this, there's a simple, predictable reason. A huge local community, a country with a massive diaspora in that exact city, showing up to support one of their own the way people always have in sports. Flags, chants, the pride of seeing someone who looks like you or shares your roots compete on a big stage. Toronto had that. Toronto is home to over 270,000 Filipinos, one of the largest Filipino communities anywhere outside the Philippines. When Alex Eala played there, it made total sense that the arena felt like a home game. The numbers matched the noise. But Cincinnati doesn't have that built-in army. The Filipino population here sits somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people. Do the math on that gap for a second. Toronto's community was roughly 250 times larger, and yet the energy right now, according to people who were physically present in both cities, feels almost identical. That's not a small discrepancy. That's the kind of number that should make this impossible. And it's exactly why insiders inside the sport are stunned, because they've spent years learning what normal crowd behavior looks like. They know how diaspora support works. They know the difference between a genuine hometown atmosphere and temporary curiosity. This isn't either of those. This is something else entirely. So, let's rewind, because to understand why Cincinnati is losing its mind over a player it barely has a demographic reason to support, you need to understand what happened before she ever set foot in Ohio. And it starts with a comeback that shouldn't have happened at all. A few weeks earlier, in the middle of a physically brutal, emotionally exhausting summer swing, Alex won her very first WTA Tour title in Washington, D.C., at a tournament most casual fans wouldn't even circle on a calendar. It wasn't supposed to be her moment. She entered as a player still climbing, still proving. And yet somewhere in that tournament, something shifted, a dramatic from-behind title run that required her to dig through multiple three-set battles, including a final against a top-3 player that ended with a bagel in the deciding set. The post-match interview that followed became something larger than a tennis clip. She broke down in tears. The moment was so raw that people who don't even follow tennis started sharing it. That's the first domino. A breakthrough that didn't just change her ranking, it changed how people felt when they watched her. Then came Toronto, and this is where things start to feel less like a rising player having a good month and more like the beginning of a phenomenon nobody had fully clocked yet. She made it to the 4th round of the National Bank Open. The crowd behavior there was so intense that Alex herself went on Instagram afterward and described the feeling as being inside a barangay back home, using the Filipino word for neighborhood. She compared the noise and chaos inside a 12,500-seat arena to the electric, packed gym atmosphere of a community basketball league final. Think about the weight of that comparison. She wasn't describing a polite, supportive tennis crowd clapping between points. She was describing something closer to a hometown celebration transplanted into a country thousands of miles from where she grew up. The flags never stopped. The chants never quieted. The building felt claimed. And here's the detail that should stop you in your tracks. Even her opponents started noticing it out loud. After beating her in that Toronto match, a former world number 4 and Olympic gold medalist turned to the stands afterward and admitted in her own words that most of the crowd had clearly been rooting for Alex and thanked them anyway for how incredible the atmosphere had been. Sit with that for a second. A player who had just won her match still felt the need to acknowledge that the crowd overwhelmingly belonged to the woman she'd beaten. That's not normal tournament energy. That's something closer to gravity, a pull strong enough that it bends the room even when she loses. The opponent didn't complain about the noise. She recognized it. She compared it, carefully, to the intensity she remembered from playing Serena Williams. That comparison landed harder than any scoreline. So now you understand why Cincinnati should have been the quiet chapter, the palate cleanser, the tournament where, statistically, none of that swirling emotional intensity should follow her because the local numbers simply aren't there to sustain it. And yet it followed her anyway. The practice courts are crowded. The early lines are real. The energy has crossed the border without the population to explain it. Which brings us to Rennae Stubbs, a name that carries real weight in this sport. Someone who has seen decades of players come and go, seen manufactured hype collapse under its own weight more times than she can count. When Stubbs starts talking about Alex, she doesn't talk about her like a flash in the pan. She frames Cincinnati as the next test, a chance to prove that Washington and Toronto weren't a lucky, unrepeatable streak, but the start of something that's actually sustainable. And then she says the part that should really make you pause, that whether or not Alex goes deep in this tournament, more people are already talking about her than ever before, and that people inside the sport genuinely believe she has the potential to pull an entirely new generation of fans into tennis. That is not a small thing to say. That's not casual praise. That's someone with decades of credibility looking at a still developing story and staking her reputation on the idea that this is bigger than one hot month. When a voice like Stubbs starts treating a player as a potential culture shifter rather than a temporary storyline, the conversation changes. But here's where the story takes a sharp, uncomfortable turn. Because all of this adoration, all of this crowd energy building around her is arriving directly ahead of a match that could end her tournament before it even really begins. Alex enters as the 17th seed, which earns her a bye straight into the second round. Waiting there is one of two players, Poland's Magda Linette or Romania's Elena Gabriela Rus. And here's the part nobody in that crowd wants to think about. She does not currently have a winning record against either one of them. Start with the worst of the two nightmares. If it's Ruse waiting across the net, the history is brutal. Alex is winless against her, having lost in 3 tight, punishing sets back in the 2024 US Open qualifiers. And Ruse isn't just dangerous on paper, she's dangerous right now, in this exact moment, having just pulled off a jaw-dropping comeback in Toronto days earlier, clawing back from being down 4 games to love in a set, to beat an American opponent in 3 sets. That's not a player limping into Cincinnati. That's a player who just proved, in the same city Alex left behind, that she thrives specifically in moments where the match looks over. If she comes through, Alex isn't just facing someone she's never beaten. She's facing someone freshly reminded of exactly how good she is at stealing matches that should already be lost. The emotional and physical residue of that Toronto battle is still recent. Now flip to the other possibility. If it's Linette instead, the picture looks slightly friendlier on the surface. The two have split their 4 career meetings evenly, and Alex has actually won the last 2 at the ASB Classic and again at the Miami Open. That sounds like momentum. Except go back further, and Linette has beaten her twice before that. In Abu Dhabi in 2024, and again in Nottingham in 2025. And there's one more detail that should make anyone underestimating Linette think twice. This is the same player who just months earlier at the 2026 Miami Open knocked out a 5-time Grand Slam champion. That's not a name you dismiss as a routine second-round formality. That's a 34-year-old veteran who has already shown this year exactly what she's capable of when the moment is right. Experience, variety, and the ability to disrupt rhythm are still very much present. So here's the tension sitting underneath every single person camping outside that practice court. They are not showing up because the result feels safe. They are showing up despite knowing on paper that this match could end in heartbreak. And that changes everything about how you should read this crowd. This isn't blind, guaranteed win fandom. This is people choosing to show up anyway because somewhere along the way, watching her stopped being about the scoreline and started being about something else entirely. The investment is no longer conditional on winning. The presence itself has become the point. There's another layer buried in this story that makes Cincinnati even heavier than it looks from the outside. This is literally her first time ever competing at this specific tournament. She was supposed to play it last year, but a shoulder injury forced her to withdraw before she ever got the chance. So underneath the crowds, underneath the terrifying draw, there's a quiet personal milestone happening, a debut on the back of the single best month of her career, and also on the back of one of the most physically draining stretches she's ever had to survive. Nearly 2 straight weeks of high-level, high-pressure tennis led into her exit from the Canadian Open, and from there, barely any time to recover before landing in Ohio. Her team has been working overtime just to keep her body from breaking down completely, and she's been open about how much she values simply staying healthy right now, treating it like the single most important thing on her list. She is not walking into Cincinnati fresh. She is walking in running on fumes. The ankle that flared in Toronto is still part of the conversation. The shoulder history is still part of the conversation. And the fans lining up before sunrise seem to understand that completely. They're showing up anyway, treating every practice session like it matters just as much as the match itself. Now here's where you need to understand where she actually came from, because it reframes everything you've just heard. This is a woman who grew up training on courts with cracks running through the surface, gaps in the net, no fencing to stop a stray ball from rolling into the street, in a country with almost no infrastructure for producing professional tennis players, let alone one who could compete at this level. That's not a polished academy origin story. That's raw. That's the kind of beginning that, when it eventually breaks through, tends to create the most loyal, most emotionally invested fan bases in all of sports, because people aren't just watching a talented athlete. They're watching someone climb out of almost nothing in real time, and they feel like they're part of it. The absence of a traditional pathway makes the arrival feel more personal. Every step forward carries the weight of the path that wasn't supposed to exist. And when reporters have asked her about the crowds that have turned every North American stop into something resembling a home match, she keeps circling back to the same idea, that the support isn't really about her individually, that it belongs to something bigger, and that it keeps growing right alongside her, city after city. That kind of framing matters more than people realize. A player who pushes the spotlight outward instead of hoarding it tends to build the kind of relationship with an audience that doesn't fade, the kind that multiplies instead of leveling off. She doesn't claim the noise as personal property. She treats it as shared. That posture changes how the support travels. So now zoom all the way out, because here's the piece that should really unsettle you if you think about it for more than a few seconds. Tennis fandom has always been built on proximity. Historically, if a player draws a massive crowd in a foreign city, it's because that city has a large population from the player's home country. Decades of infrastructure, local federations selling tickets specifically to that community, generations of families who show up every single year because that's simply what their community does. Alex doesn't have any of that in Cincinnati. She has no decades of built infrastructure. She has months, a handful of months of results. One viral, tearful interview, one dramatic comeback title, one electric night in Toronto that forced tournament directors and opponents to recalibrate what support looks like. And somehow that alone has been enough to generate a crowd that mirrors a city with 250 times the built-in fan base. That's not a fan base she inherited. That's one she is actively building in real time, one tournament at a time, in front of everyone. And if you're wondering why that distinction matters so much, here it is. Community-driven support is powerful, but it's geographically limited by definition. It only shows up where the community already lives. Crossover fandom doesn't work that way. It follows the person, not the population. It shows up in cities with almost no built-in connection to her at all, purely because people have decided they're fans of her specifically, the same way people around the world became fans of superstar athletes with no personal tie to their home country whatsoever. Once a player crosses that line, the ceiling on how far this can travel basically disappears. The support becomes portable. It no longer needs a local population to justify its presence. Which brings us to the part of this story that should make everything you've just heard feel like a warm-up act. New York is next. The US Open is coming in a matter of weeks. And New York is home to one of the largest, most passionate Filipino communities anywhere in the United States, a community that dwarfs what she experienced in Toronto, let alone the tiny population currently packing itself into Cincinnati. If a city with barely 2,000 Filipino residents is already producing scenes that stun tour veterans, you have to ask yourself what happens when she walks onto a court in front of a community measured not in the thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands, fully mobilized, fully aware of exactly what they're watching. Cincinnati might not even be the peak of this story, it might just be the preview. The volume in Queens has the potential to rewrite the noise level entirely. And there's one more thing worth sitting with before any of this plays out. Crowd energy isn't just emotional noise. Players talk constantly about how a supportive crowd can shift the actual rhythm of a tight match, how it can hand you an extra half second of belief on a break point, how it can carry you through a tired third set when your legs are screaming at you to stop. She's already shown this season, in that gutting comeback win over a top American opponent in Washington, that she has the ability to find her best tennis exactly when the moment demands it most. So when she walks out against Ruse or Lynette, whichever name ends up standing across the net, she won't just be facing a dangerous, well-prepared opponent. She'll be walking out with a stadium full of people who have no demographic reason to be there in these numbers and who showed up anyway, fully aware of how hard this match could go. That knowledge changes the weight of every point. That's the real story sitting underneath the surprise. It was never really about Cincinnati, or Toronto before it, or Washington before that. It's about a woman who trained on cracked courts with no fencing, who cried on camera after beating a Wimbledon champion, who turned one summer into a wave that keeps rolling forward no matter how small the local welcoming committee is supposed to be. Normally, this kind of crossover appeal takes years to build, sometimes an entire career. She has built the early version of it in a single relentless summer. The infrastructure wasn't there, the population wasn't there, the expectation wasn't there, and still the people arrived. So whatever happens when the draw is finalized, whoever walks onto that court to face her, remember this. The crowd isn't there because the outcome feels safe. It's there because somewhere over the last few months, without a single decade of infrastructure behind her, Alex turned herself into the kind of player people simply choose to follow, city after city, match after match, whether or not there's anyone from home there to greet her. The support has become voluntary, portable, self-sustaining, and if Cincinnati really is just the preview, New York is about to find out exactly how loud this can get. Tennis Diaries, where the ones who saw the wave building stay until it reaches the biggest stage.